the growth strategist himself, Simon Haigh. And I'm really excited to have you on because we've been talking a lot around values and alignment, and we the fantastic Cortez Legentier with the lines, and then we had Dr. Susie Mitchell. We talked a lot around values and beliefs, and I'm really happy to have you on today. But in case anyone doesn't know who the amazing Simon Haigh is, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm not sure I'm amazing, but I try my hardest. But it's great to be here, Louise. And yeah, I mean, I'm referred to as the growth strategist. And I guess what I do is I do try to do two things at the same time. I try and help organizations grow by achieving their purpose, and at the same time help leaders and entrepreneurs to grow by achieving their potential. So purpose and potential. And I do that through various training, coaching, mentoring, consulting work. So, and it gets me to meet some amazing companies, leaders, organizations, and have some great chats, including with you. So I'm looking forward to this one.
Yeah. So I suppose we're talking with coaches specifically, I suppose, over the last two episodes, and your journey as a coach, I suppose, because I think a lot of people listening to this, a lot of leaders, a lot of managers, they're trying to get their head around this coaching thing and how to apply that in the workplace, because we have a lot of the theory there. But I suppose on your own kind of journey into coaching, and I suppose the transition you made, you were obviously in the corporate world and you were leading teams. I suppose, what's your thoughts on how you found your purpose in that domain of coaching as a leader, I suppose, and how has that kind of changed?
Well, it's been a journey, and I kind of stumbled into it. My last paid job was 9 years now. I ended up becoming a CEO for an American company in Australia, and I took a payoff, and I decided, well, what can I do? What are my skill sets? And I realized that what I love doing is getting deals done. It's helping leaders find a better version of them. It's helping organizations grow. And so I thought, why don't I give this a go? And initially in Australia, I started the business in Australia. I was really doing more consulting work. So the traditional sort of strategy and business development type stuff. And then I moved back to Australia nearly 6 years ago now. And I started doing some training with the likes of Trinity and Queen's Belfast. And then really the start of coaching, even though I was a qualified Marshall Goldsmith coach, I qualified back in 2016, I wasn't really doing coaching. It was more consulting and training. And then the change of direction was through ISME, and you know ISME well. And I started doing some one-on-one coaching with business leaders. And that was 4 years ago, and it's kind of taken off. And I think the word of mouth has got out. And I guess for me, what I guess if you were to say the reason I'm becoming successful at it is that I know what it's like to run a small business. I know what it's like to be a senior executive in a large company and to run a small business. And at the end of the day, there's some core fundamentals. And, if you're a busy leader or an entrepreneur, you don't want academics, you don't want theories. You need to know how to go from A to B. And so I guess that's my background. A, I've been a lawyer. B, I've been a CEO. I've also been an entrepreneur. I've run my own watch company. I've invested in businesses. So I know at the end of the day, you're really, really busy. You're short of time and you want somebody you can trust. That's the most important thing. If you can't trust your coach, then they're not a coach, And the second thing is what I've learned about myself over the last 3 or 4 years is that while I don't ever profess to get into the space of counseling or psychotherapy or any of that, I'm not qualified. What I bring is my own experiences in life. Some of the dramas that I've had, some of the reasons to be a little bit more authentic than maybe people would expect when you see my LinkedIn. I am vulnerable. I've had real difficult times. But I've also noticed I've got a huge amount of resilience. And so I can bring that to bear. And what I really do is when I coach, I'm looking to do 3 things. I've got a session this afternoon with another client out in City West. I'm looking to help build the drive, the ambition, the grit, the resilience of the person I work with. And I can demonstrate some ways to do that. And the second thing is help them with their strategic thinking. What are the sort of things that they should be focusing on, which are really revenue, risk, and reputation, and everything else is secondary. And then thirdly, and most importantly, what are the right opportunities to chase? Because so many people spend so much time chasing the wrong opportunities. And that's all just come through experience and the school of hard knocks, a bit of my own theory and life. And I love it. It's great to see somebody have that aha moment, realize, oh, it's not so difficult. If I work on this, I can improve incrementally. So that's a little bit of the journey.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think listening to you there, habits come through obviously, and recognizing those things. And I want to ask you a question because it played a role in, I suppose, my journey. How important do you think it is, I suppose, for leaders to reflect, to use reflective practice as part of their growth journey? Do you think it's important?
I think it's hugely important. I think, Marshall Goldsmith has this quote, and I'm probably going to get it wrong, but he says something like, to be successful as a leader, you have to do a number of things, but really he focuses on, you have to rely on collaborations and be facilitators rather than experts. And that takes reflection, right? To move away from the old school of ego-driven, thumping the table, win at all costs kind of success, to, if I take this more gently and softly and be the real version of me, the aligned version of me that Hortense talks about, even though it might feel counterintuitive, it might feel that I'm getting soft, and it's actually the only way to be successful. I'm about to do a podcast with an amazing guy in the States, and the name of it is something like, why being yourself is the true way to be successful. And so many people fight against that. So many people think they need to put on a face, that they need to have this corporate image, and that actually pushes people away. But it takes reflection. It takes a lot of reflection. It took me a lot of reflection to figure this stuff out, and well, I'm always going to figure it out. So yeah, it's a huge thing. It's a huge thing.
I don't see a lot of that in any programs, in any training, in any companies I've worked with, Simon. I see it a lot when we're doing individual, but I always wondered why they don't introduce these kind of tools or these supports. Why do you think that is, I suppose?
I think there's a bit of fear in companies. I think there still is a fear of that vulnerability, and I think there is almost kind of an arrogance that this is stuff for those coaching people. We're the big corporate and we can get through. But I think some of them are starting to open up. I'm doing some work now with PayPal, one of my clients, and they've genuinely asked for a more a deeper thinking, as you say, reflective way of coaching and training. And I often talk about what I talk about is 21st century leadership. And I bring it back to the fact that, yes, you need to grow, right? Growth is the key, because otherwise you're going to go backwards. But when you think about it, to grow, you need to differentiate. You need to be different. And to be different, you need to innovate. To innovate, you need diversity. And then to have diversity, you need to have an inclusive mindset and inclusive behaviors. And that's not just inclusive towards other people. That's inclusive towards yourself. That's being compassionate. That's being courageous. And that often means saying no, but it means to be more open-minded and a bit more aware of opportunities. And so I do think some smart companies are starting, but you're right. So many companies are still locked into this almost fear-based mindset. It's frustrating, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it was really interesting because I'm just going to share with you, I was doing a little bit of research for a workshop. I'm doing a leadership workshop, and I was reading something I came across in Brené Brown that really stood out to me. And it stood out to me because I could relate to it personally on my own leadership journey and also with other people. And what she talks about is, when we talk about vulnerability, we don't really talk about shame. And I think shame plays such a big part. And when I really delved into it, it was the shame of being a perfect leader and nearly having all the answers when you actually don't, and actually going to that team of 20, 30, 40 people and being really vulnerable and going, I actually don't have the answer, and and showing that to them. And I just thought that kind of level of transparency I don't really see, and I didn't see how wrapped up in shame that it could be that, is it going to make me look like I'm not good enough in the job I'm in? How are people going to view me? How am I going to get the promotion, or how am I going to get this? And I'm just wondering, when will this be a norm? Because and it really got me thinking about places I've worked, and I was thinking, how could I, if I was to go back in the time machine, Simon, or if I was to go back working in those organizations again, and for people listening, because I love to put kind of, theory into practice, how could you even start doing that, you know, if in those companies? Or does it have to really start from the bottom or from the very top at a boardroom, or can it start at middle or lower level?
It depends on the organization,
Yeah.
but I think overall, if you don't have the senior exec, if you don't have the right open-minded, willing, honest senior executives in an organization, I don't think you're going to break the model. And you know, I worked when I was an employee, a lawyer. I did work for an American company, and the CEO there, an amazing guy called Wim Lance. This was 20 years ago in California, and he had that awareness that it was about being a trust-based leader, right? And a non-arrogant trust-based leader. And so he would do simple things like he wouldn't have his own office. He would rotate his office around the campus because his view was, why should I lord it over everybody else? I'm just the CEO. I'm not the CEO. I'm just the CEO. It's just a title. I'm one of a number of employees. And so there's no easy answer to this. I think you just need to have more open-minded and aware leaders. And I guess one of the things is that, you know, one of the challenges is that you and I and smart and open-minded, you know, coaches and consultants, like the people you've interviewed, we all know that there is a change needed, you know, moving from traditional leadership to agile leadership, because organizations need to adapt, and they need to be more reflective, and they need to be more sensitive, and they need to adapt to the market. And the market is much more sensitive, particularly since the pandemic. People, you know, we hear about the great resignation. We hear about people being a much more open-minded and aware about what they want in life. And so things like some of the better leaders I've come across view leadership as, instead of ensuring that teams do things right, they have this mindset that their role is to make sure the teams do the right things, right? And that's giving them the tools, that's trusting them to do it. That's what I call contextual leadership. That's, you know, this is what we need you to do. Go and do it, right? Go and do it. And if you make a mistake, as long as you own up to it, as long as it's not a fundamental error, that's part of the process. But that takes a lot of courage, right? And I think, to answer your question in a long-winded way, there just isn't enough. There hasn't been enough courage, real courage with leadership, right? And I think that's really important. And operating in that trust, contextual leadership, innovation environment. I don't know what's going to flip it, but I think the more companies, the more leaders we see, I think more people will come on board. And people like Brené Brown, the work she does, and other inspirers, that can only permeate through. It can only do. Yeah,
definitely. Something, because we're talking about leadership and culture always comes up, and I think it's a talking point at the moment, especially with a lot of people resigning, and we're seeing how can we retain people and how can we create something where people actually want to stay and not get up and leave. I suppose places I've worked in comparisons to places that I probably never want to work in again, always gave me a sense of I belonged there. I felt like I was part of something, not part of the payroll system, not a number, but I felt like I was part of something that meant something. And I always thought that was really important. And I would always see other people that would come in to the organization, what's their motivations, why are they wanting to be in there, you know, why do you want to work here as opposed to somewhere down the road? And they would tell me that what that is, and I would always look to tap into that, because I think that's really important, because that will make them either stay or go. Belonging, I think, is something, and I think, I don't know, is it because it's very much an emotional world, but it's something I don't really hear a lot of people say in the workplace. And it's something that I was thinking about. And does it have a place? You know, how do we kind of, I suppose, proposition this to people that maybe are going, you know what, don't really want to hear that, Louise. You know, I've better things to do in my day. I suppose, what's your take on that?
It's funny you should mention, you're the second person who's mentioned to me belonging in the last week. And somebody's asked me, would I maybe help out on a program around belonging? And for me, it all comes back to this inclusive leadership thing. And I'll explain. So I've done quite a lot of work in this space. And you're right. I mean, the largest reason for people leaving organizations is they feel like they're not included. They're not being recognized. They don't really feel part of it, right? It's not money, and it's not pension and all these things. It's that feeling of, I'm there, but I'm not really there, which is a lack of feeling of belonging. And there are 5 key areas that have come out of a number of surveys that I've kind of brought together, that if leaders really wanted to shortcut this and demonstrate, at least demonstrate that they're looking at belonging in the right way, they would have a head start. And the first one is, I've mentioned inclusion and recognition, right? Employees want to feel included. They want to experience a sense of, we're in this together and we're going to do our best to move forward. Of course, there are some people who aren't, right? But generally speaking, most employees want to feel included, and they're looking to have a voice within an organization, right? The second thing then is trust and autonomy. Employees want to feel trusted. They want their leaders and organizations to trust them to do the job. And this goes hand in hand with that feeling that they are really included. The third thing then is growth and development. Employees are looking for opportunities to grow and develop, and which is all part of being noticed. It's having attention paid to you, right? Without being controlled, without micromanagement. And then the fourth thing then is vision and clear expectations. They want to have a sense that the management, the leadership is cohesive, aligned, and inclusive in its direction. Because without that inspiration, why would you bother commit, right? And then the fifth thing then is they need good leadership. They're looking for leaders not to control them, not to dictate, but to facilitate. And so there are those 5 areas. And but it's easy for me to say, right? It's easy to say this sort of stuff when you're talking to. And one of the things I've noticed when I give training and I ask, leaders, well, why isn't this happening within your organization? And the answer that comes out nearly every time is, we're too busy. And I'm thinking, well, all the evidence demonstrates that inclusive, aligned, cohesive organizations are more productive. They have better brand value. They have better employer branding and potentially more profitable. So that's just a bit of a short excuse, But I think making the leap from today to tomorrow and believing that you can change and improve, that's where the gap is. And I think it just needs people like us and Susie and Hortense and Brené and all these people who see this and know this, because we work in organizations, to keep saying it, to keep saying it. But again, there's no, if there were a shortcut answer, there wouldn't be any coaches and consultants.
Yeah. It's just really interesting, because I think it comes back, and I don't know what your thoughts is. It comes back really, I think a lot of it is the individual. And sometimes we look at it as the collective. We use these words and we look at it, okay, let's all have a great culture, but that's not really, because once we go and we do that, we're pushing that then far away. We're not bringing it, internalizing that and bringing it towards us.
That's a good point. We all have a responsibility ourselves to contribute, and the other thing then is leadership. I mean, leadership isn't easy, right? It's really, really difficult. Good leadership is really difficult. Dave Ulrich, the father of modern HR, talks about the DNA of today's leaders, and it's really, it's very complicated. And on the one hand, a good leader needs to be a developer of human capital. Their job is to build the brand and create psychological safety and trust. A good leader, right? Yeah. And at the same time, they have to be a strategist. They have to harness information and uncertainty and try and figure a way forward. They have to be personally proficient. They have to be a talent manager and almost kind of a mentor and a coach. And then lastly, they have to be an executor. They have to actually execute. And I think it's funny, because I'm doing a speech in Milan in October about 21st century leadership. And I think we're all leaders, right? We should all think of ourselves as leaders and don't rely on that big person in the top office. And I think we're starting to see this in politics. We're starting to see that these politicians actually don't really know as much as maybe we had attributed to them. And I think the same in corporates. If you keep waiting for the big leader to make the decisions and to make life great and inclusive and a sense of belonging for you, you might be waiting forever. So I do think we've all got a responsibility. That's easier said than done again, though.
Yeah, I do think I totally agree with that. And because I was reading I read an article, and it said, and a couple of ones, and I kind of, I see it from a different angle, I suppose, but a lot of them were saying, it's up to this one person to change that culture, but I don't see from a ground level, and a day to day, and those people at a lower levels of the organization, and they are the culture, because they're the people that are facing your customers. So if I was to give retail as an example, you've the people in head office, they might be in a different country, which was the case in a lot of places I worked, but we were that facing environment, we were that culture. So if you went to a shop in Galway or Dublin or London or Milan that you're going and doing your talking, it would be different in each of those sites. So there could be 400 or 500 stores, but they're different. And I think it's the people in there. It is not the product on the shelf. It is not the objects. It's the people. I think it's the living organisms that actually create that culture. So I do think that it's created by each, because if we look at the flip side, I think if we look at when the culture goes down, we've brought someone into the organization that isn't fitting well with the values and the way we run the business, we can see that flip, Simon, quite quickly. If we bring someone in that doesn't fit in. So the power of that.
It's interesting to say this, and I don't mind giving this as an example because it's a good example, but I had to do training recently through our mutual friend, Charlie Boyle, up in Donegal with McElhenny's, the department store there in Ballybuffet. And I didn't really know too much about it, other than it's the biggest department store outside Dublin. And my job was to go and do DEI training. This was about 6 weeks ago. And so I knew nothing really about the culture, other than I'd heard good things. But my reactions were based purely on human interaction. So the first thing is I arrived that morning, I didn't really know where I was meant to go. And I walked into the front of this department store and I thought, where do I go? Like, I can't see a manager's office. And just by accident, somebody was walking out, a young guy with a pad, right? And I thought, I wonder if he's going to the training, right? And before I could even say anything to him, he noticed me and said, can I help you? And he was so friendly, so smile on his face, and we ended up, and he was going to the training, so he took me over, and that was my first reaction. And then when we got into the room, nobody could figure out how to use the projector, and one of the audience was really nice and came and actually set the thing up. And all through the day, right, it was me giving the facilitation, and yet they were actually facilitating my understanding of their culture, which was helpful, accommodating, open-minded, willing, all of those positive things. And I think I kind of reflected that back at the end of the day, and they realized they did have an inclusive culture, right? They actually had it. They just needed it shone back at them. So it's what all the humans put together that creates the culture, exactly as you said.
Yeah. And I think a couple of years ago, because I think it's become a big talking point now, but if you were to say to me 10 years ago, culture and all this different thing, I wouldn't have known what you were talking about at all, Simon, right? Because I wasn't really I didn't really understand a lot of that 10 years ago. But I'm just looking back now on how it's changed, I suppose, the expectation of who's coming into the workplace now, and the Gen Zers and all of that. And I look at my son who started his first job there 2 weeks ago, and his expectation of working versus my expectation of working is so different, Simon. And I said, what's your thoughts on that? What's your thoughts on those kind of those changes that are happening?
I think it can only be a good thing. I mean, it's funny, when I started working back in the 80s, I mean, being bullied was quite common. And I remember, I won't mention the company, but I had tonsillitis 25 years ago, and I was told by a boss, and I was in really bad shape, right? I felt really bad. And I remember being told by a boss to get out of bed and keep working, and today, because I was young and scared, right, and fearful, I did, right? But today I wouldn't stand for that. I would say, with respect, I'm not well. I'll do it when I'm better. And so I do think that there is, whereas flip forward to today, I'm doing a lot of training around DEI right now. And even with some government type bodies and state bodies that I wouldn't expect to be as open-minded as they are, and they are openly talking about, not just gender, but the whole LGBTQI space, and the fact that in the audience there are people, the attendees, there are people across all spectrums of life, right? And I wouldn't have expected that open community conversation. And it's a wonderful thing, because Every human being is different. Every human being is entitled to be different. Nobody should be judged for who they are or what they are. And yet this is so far away from even 20 years ago, and things like neurodiversity and all of this stuff, and cohesiveness and alignment and inclusion. It's just, it can only be a good thing, because as I said before, you only grow if you innovate, and you only innovate if you differentiate. If we were all just the same clones, you wouldn't go anywhere. Now, there are barriers to this stuff. I do think I'm hearing there's some pushback now that, you're hearing, oh, well, there are too many jobs created in diversity, equity, inclusion, and we're diverting from true strategy. I do think that there needs to be diversity, equity, inclusion is a core part of strategy. I don't think it should be created as a separate part of the business. It's an underpinning of strategic direction. And so I think there are some challenges, but I think overall it's a wonderful thing. And, the 6 drivers of inclusive decision-making: relationship building, recognition, empathy, as I said before, trust, building trust, ensuring alignment as much as you can. And as we've said, encouraging participation. It's just noticing people. In the olden days, I don't think employers thought remotely about the importance of noticing. It was about getting what you could out of people.
Yeah. And it is really nice to see what I see anyways with my son going in. They're a lot more braver than I would have been. I didn't really have a voice.
I agree.
And I love that bravery, and the fact that they're comfortable enough to actually say, I don't want to. And I think we need that. We need those kind of those conversations happening. We need that kind of, that back and forth, instead of that one voice, you do this and the nodding of the head, and you'd go off and you'd do whatever you're told, and you didn't have a voice, I think, for a while. So I think it's really nice to see that shift happen.
Absolutely. And just the way we think about communication. I mean, Erica Darwin, who is a leading expert in the future of business and how you integrate technology, she talks about, hopefully I can remember now this, she talks about the 4 key aspects of integrative, innovative, inclusive organizations. And the first one is value visibly, right? Do I respect each person's time in my team? And do I acknowledge and celebrate? And do I try and help others feel comfortable? Second one then is communicate carefully. Is be careful about what you say and how you say it. Third one then is collaborate confidently. Am I clear about which communication channels I'm using? Do I use the right language? And the last one is trust totally, right? Once you've done those first 3, value visibly, communicate carefully, collaborate confidently, it's easier to trust. Now, of course, there are always outliers, but I just think that's wonderful, that kind of language. We never talked like that 20 years ago. And some cynics out there might say, well, this is a lot of fluff, and business is about revenue, right? But it's not. I keep saying that triangle: revenue, risk, and reputation. And if you keep chasing headlong for revenue at the risk of damaging risk or reputation, you're going to collapse. And I saw this in Australia. A $1 billion engineering company went bankrupt very quickly because it didn't have in place the right structures to manage risk and reputation. So you have to have that triangle balance. And I think this plays into the language today,
Yeah. And it goes back to, I think you were talking a little bit, and you do a lot of work around brands and trusting. And I always think that we sometimes, and there was a post I seen, there was a little bit of a discussion I heard of, logos and the importance of a logo and all of this. And there was someone that made a really valid point, and I actually really liked it, was that we don't follow that brand. We don't recognize, Nike or Apple because it's a tick or because it's an Apple bitten sign. It's the reputation built around that. And that's through relationships. That's through that relationship it built with people. And I think when we go into this language of, again, it's putting things abstract, and this can happen sometimes if there's a lot of talk on certain things. I find that we can go, okay, this is why it's there, but it's not. If we actually go really down to the root cause of it, it's actually those relationships that we built around that. And actually leads me really nicely into the next question. And this is something that used to be a big bugbear of me. And I've seen a couple of places that done it really well, and I'll give examples on that, and some places that didn't. a lot of people are kind of talking around organizational values, and a lot of them I find are aspirations. Okay, it's what they aspire to be, and they have them in the back of house, and they have them on the wall, and you'll see them every time there's a marketing or a product launch or whatever that is. They'll talk about the brand values, but then they go and they put them back in the little box and they're
Yeah.
pushed in that cupboard, and they're not, they're not really taught, measured, evaluated, any of that sort of thing. And then I look on the flip side and I see other places that done it really well. What's your kind of take on that, I suppose? Because I'm hearing a lot of people talking about organization values. And do you see that where people they're more aspirations than what they're actually doing in the business?
I do. I do quite regularly, particularly in consulting.
Yeah.
And I won't mention any companies, but they think some organizations think that by bringing in a change agent or a consultant to go through a process to shine a light on where they're at is enough, and then they file that in a box and they say they've done the job. And for me, there's too much talk about values and vision statements and all this sort of stuff. For me, it all goes back to the top, which is, what's the purpose of your organization? Why are you in business? What's your purpose? And I think not enough companies are thinking about their purpose, right? And because if you don't think about your purpose, how can you really truly hang the right values that fit that purpose? So, for example, a good example of that is Smurfit Kappa, right? They're a cardboard box manufacturing company, one of the world's biggest ones, a great Irish success. Okay. But they've been going through a whole process recently about, is that our purpose? And should that be our purpose? Or should we, and this is a genuine attempt to look at this is not a cynical attempt, or should we be thinking, well, are we bigger than that? Are we braver than that? Are we more of a logistics company? And are we, assisting the flow of products around the world in a greener way, right? And there's arguments to and fro as to whether they really are or not, but at least they're really thinking about it, right? Because by thinking about your purpose, it's easier then to have a true conversation about your values, right? If you just put values on a vision statement or a mission on the wall, you can come up with any words. You can Google the top 10 nice words to describe a company. I'm sure lots of companies do this, right? Yeah. And so, and when you think about leadership in this whole thing, the whole point of leadership is to create a bridge to the future. That's what leadership is. It's creating a bridge to the future, while at the same time keeping things steady today and telling the truth as much as you can out there. And again, you can only provide a bridge to the future if you know what you're doing, your purpose. And so I think it really starts from that. And I think organizations really need to have a good look at what they're doing, why they're doing it, rather than what they're saying about themselves, if that makes sense,
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. I think and what you're touching on, like a lot of places, I think it's nearly a tick the box exercise.
It is.
Yeah.
I've seen it in many places. I remember, I'm careful how I put this, but it's okay because there's been a big improvement. But when I was working for Dell 21 years ago, I was their legal counsel here in UK, Ireland, and they went through a huge process of putting together the soul of Dell culture, right? And yet, when it was dropped on employees thought, well, what is this? This has come from Mars. This was like one of these academic things created by senior executive team, and it completely misfired because people didn't have that sense of inclusive ownership, right? It was like, okay, so somebody just told me what we are, rather than us feeling it, being part of that process, feeling it, and so they've changed since, and they've gone through the opposite process. They've got as much feedback and input, and they've been as courageous about this as possible. But and no coincidence, their productivity and profitability has gone up again. So, but it's just easier, I think, for companies to take the lazy route. That's the problem. It's easier, but it backfires eventually.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I worked for a brand a couple of years ago, and we obviously had inductions and we had a staff handbook, and that was the only place where I seen the values. And then fast forward, we had an area meeting, and then the values came up in a marketing slide. That's all I've seen from it. Now I'm going to jump into a retailer that really does the values really well, and that's Woody's DIY and their CEO Declan Moran, and they really do bring brand values to life. And I can say that because I worked for them. But how they actually done that was they actually talked about it in a behavioral piece. So every morning in that store, we would have a whiteboard, Simon, and we would have all of the values up, and we would celebrate if we seen one of the team living those values. And we would go, do you know what, I seen you yesterday, Simon, you brought out you know, the plant the moss to the, you know, those big moss bags to the lady's car. You had a really nice chat, you know, you're really, and one of the values I think was homely and real, you know, you're really homely with them, you're really authentic and you're your real self. And we would all celebrate, you know, and we would go, well done. But we were actually pinpointing what that looked like. And I think that's what a lot of places don't do. And it was done every day. So you couldn't get away from it. You knew what the expectation was. Gray area on it. And it was a conversation. And what they actually done as well was they had a software on an app. And what they done was really clever, right? They had an app specifically just for Woody's staff. And if they seen Simon doing a really good display, I would say, hey, Simon, and I take a picture of the display and I go, I want to give a kudos. It was called a kudos app to Simon. And he had a really amazing display and he's living our value. And they would name that value and hashtag it. So they gave the colleagues you know, they were allowed to use their phone on the shop floor, right? So that was a nice thing to do. Because a lot of businesses don't allow that because they trusted them, but they also got them buying in to not only the managers recognizing that at the morning brief, but they got the team involved all in the business. That's from the 8-hour contract, the 12-hour contract that might be, you know, on a summer job, whatever that is, they got them all involved in that. So by doing that, it fed into really building those values in. And I just thought there was so many businesses out there that I would love to see more of those little things being done, because it would become a culture by bringing that to life a little bit more.
You know, you're spot on. It's about actually demonstrating what you're doing rather than just talking about it. And it's part of that building trust. It's building trust, right? Trust doesn't just exist, right? When you go into an organization, unless you own the company, right? Why would you trust it unless you've actually seen tangible evidence of effort being made, right? And it's okay to see leadership and management get it wrong, right? As long as they are aware they've got it wrong and try and improve it and correct it, right? I would rather work for a company that tried to initiate a culture program and didn't quite get it and apologized, right? And said, we're going to try and tweak this, than one that pretended it was okay, right? And we all know, we all feel when we meet somebody or meet an organization and they're just being shallow or reading from a script. We all human beings feel this, right? And trust is such a, I often talk about, try and define what trust is, and it's very hard to write it down. But if I asked you to remember a time when you didn't trust somebody, you'd feel it in your gut feeling. So it's the same applies to companies. You feel it in your gut, right? And trust very, very quickly evaporates, or it doesn't appear, if you're in an organization and you can see they're not really, really, really trying to push this and make this real, right? And that's for me the key. You know, I'll forgive an organization, as I said, if they make a mistake and they own up to it and say, we're going to try harder next time, and we're going to try and tweak this. Michael Dell used to have this term, don't perfume the pig. In other words, if you've got things wrong as a leadership team or as an organization, don't pretend you haven't. Be honest, right? Be honest. As long as you're not giving away state secrets, people would feel more likely to trust you and work for you if they could see that, you know. But unfortunately, too many leaders are still too scared of this thing called trust.
Yeah, I think it feeds into what we said there earlier around that whole vulnerability with actually owning up to when you do make a mistake, and those feelings of, and it is there is an underlying feeling of a little bit of shame, you know, that there's you didn't, you know, within yourself, I mean, not for anyone else, not guilt, but you know, that you're not performing to, or you feel weak, or whatever that inferior feeling is. I think that's where I don't think probably not enough work is done, but I do think a lot of that is internal work. I think it's on the individual, because you know, somebody that's maybe that has a lot of empathy, or somebody that's maybe more open to somebody that's closed, that can be a lot harder for them to do. So I do think we need to work on ourselves, but it's not just people that have a badge or people that have certain rankings. I think it's understanding that everyone is working a little bit on themselves and understanding how they're putting themselves out there for an emotional piece. Because for a long time, I remember years ago, I was told by a manager, you know, we leave our feelings at the door when we come in here, Louise. You know, I remember being told your game face. Yeah.
I remember being told, I won't mention the company, but it was a law firm, we don't have time for emotions in here. I mean, that's mad. Yeah. And, you know, it's interesting that there's a place in Texas, Houston, the Rice University in Houston, Texas. And they have a center called the DOOR, DOERR, Institute of New Leadership. And they're doing amazing work, right? In actually, and I've met some of the people there, and they're actually trying to figure out how you can measure, how you can give a roadmap from a leader to ensure that they're doing everything they can to be an effective, inclusive, aligned, cohesive leader, right? And actually to self-score yourself, right? And they've come up with 5 key areas to help you on this journey. And the first one is knowing yourself. So as you said, it all starts with yourself, right?
Yeah.
So do you have a sense of your own purpose? I've mentioned the word purpose. Are you self-confident? That doesn't mean egotistical or bragging, but does that mean, are you prepared to be courageous? And the third thing then is self-aware. So that's knowing yourself. And then the second area then is controlling yourself. Even though you know yourself, you've still got to control. You've got to have a balance. You've got to, and that's resilience as well. And the third thing then is being aware of others, cross-cultural resourcefulness and ethical responsibility and empathetic engagement. The fourth one then is working with others, you know, conflict management, team building, collaboration, delegation, all those things. And finally, growing yourself, which is innovative thinking, love of learning, willingness to learn through mistakes. And so there's 21 areas within those 5 areas. And it's really powerful, I think. And I think that way of looking at leadership rather than just strategy, right, is so powerful. And I think they're doing amazing work. And I think they're going to be, more and more people are going to hear about them.
Yeah. And I'm listening to what you're saying there, and I do see a lot around the innovation and that side of things, but I don't see enough around the first one you spoke about, which is the inner one. I see a lot around the other one, because I believe anyways, a lot of businesses, and I've seen it's just in my own space, I've seen that, you know, these fit into what we're doing. So we're going to take, you know, that because you're going to get this output, and they don't see the inner work as being important, you know, because they don't, okay, it's in it, we can put that off. And then it's not until something happens, or, you know, someone goes on stress leave or something happens that we're like, oh, we really need to look at this stuff now, you know, that sort of way. But it's really important, I think. And I think what you said there, that is one of the most important things that I learned in my own leadership journey, was the inner work I needed to do to be actually a better leader for other people. And because to coin the term, your greatest strength can be your greatest weakness. And that happened to me on my own journey, because I was giving that I was burnt out myself from doing it, and I didn't have boundaries. So that whole self-regulation thing, I wasn't really doing it for myself, because I was giving that away to other people. I suppose before we go, I want you to just tell me, I suppose, if you can think of 1 or 2 things that you've learned on your journey. And I've shared a little bit what I learned on mine, and I'm in a coaching thing, I'm one-to-one work now, and I have to be always conscientious of boundaries, Simon, because it's something I'm aware of, that I can give too much, and then I my family time or something else, because I'm loving what I'm doing at the moment. So I have to check myself, and sometimes that does go into overdrive. But is there anything that you can share with us that you've kind of learned, or you're on that journey with?
The first thing I would say is, and I often use these what I'm about to say in coaching and training, and I've learned to help protect myself and create my own boundaries, but also to demonstrate to others that it's a valuable thing for them, is I say to people every morning for 6 weeks, Ask yourself 3 simple questions, 3 really simple questions. Even if you find it cringy to do it, even if you think it's ridiculous, and there's no guarantee you'll agree with them by the end of the 6 weeks. But if you ask yourself 3 questions every morning, the chances are you'll be a little bit more self-aware at the end of the 6 weeks, because self-awareness is the key to everything, right? And the 3 questions are, do I like myself? And do I respect myself? And do I trust myself? Ask yourself those 3 questions every morning for 6 weeks. And I do this, and I'm actually going through the process now of, it sounds a bit over the top, but I have a mentor, and I'm going through a process now of, honestly, as much as I can, right? As much as I can remember what I'm doing in the day, doing an inventory of major thoughts that I have during the day, negative and positive thoughts. And I'm finding by doing that, and I've got a pad here, right? Here, this is my inventory pad, right? And I do this. And you might be thinking, why do you need to do this, Simon? I need to do this because I need to notice the way my mind is orientated, the way my mind might wander, a bit like when you see a dog owner take a dog for a walk, and everybody's mind could scarper like this and go to a lamppost. If I don't have a really strong sense of my triggers, my emotional behaviors, how can I honestly say that I'm an effective coach, right? If you don't have a sense of you, how can you, even though we can't mind read anybody else, we do need to have a sense of the possibilities of where the mind can go, and so that's one thing. Do I like, trust, respect? The other thing then is, Marshall Goldsmith said to me 2.5 years ago, I was banging on about, I'm not getting enough recognition, blah, blah, blah. I was whinging. And he just said, you just need to match your confidence with your capability. Go and do it. Just go and do it, right? And it doesn't matter if anybody pushes back. It doesn't matter if anybody says anything negative on LinkedIn. You can block them, you can delete it. Or, as I have done a couple of times, I'll just go back and say, thank you for your opinion, right? It's their opinion. They're entitled to their opinion. So I think so many people have imposter syndrome. They think, well, I'm not entitled to speak up. I'm not what if somebody bullies me, right? 99.99% of human beings out there will never bully you or me. They're not interested. Most people are interested in just surviving, right? Yeah. And so I think it's just waking up and realize the only real constraint you have, the biggest constraint you have rather, is you, right? So go for it. But really try and sharpen your awareness in the process as well. That's a missed opportunity if you don't go for it and try and sharpen your awareness. Anyway, that's what I would say.
Thank you, Simon. And you are so authentic in the way you speak and how open and honest you are. And I love that. I love that quality about you, that you are so vulnerable in the way you discuss not only your strengths but areas that you're working on and challenges you're having, because I think that is someone being really authentic and being vulnerable and displaying that, and you do that really well. I loved what you said there, and what just popped into my head, and it was something that I came up against, was waiting for approval before I actually done something.
You'd be waiting forever. You'd be waiting forever.
Exactly. Yeah.
If you feel you're entitled to do it, and I don't mind people who are arrogant, who know what they're doing, right? For want of a better word, who know what they're doing, who are expert. Just do it. And I forgive people who are ignorant because they don't know. What I can't stand is arrogant and ignorant people, right? And I'm not talking about being arrogant and ignorant. I'm just talking about being true to yourself, right? Being true to yourself, and go for it and see what happens. And if you don't ask, it's a guaranteed no. If you do ask, it's a 50% yes. So try.
Yeah, definitely. Where can people get you, Simon? Where is the best place to reach you if people want to reach out and speak to you?
Probably right now LinkedIn, because my website is just literally about to be relaunched in the next couple of weeks. So LinkedIn, I'm very active on LinkedIn. Simon Haigh, Haigh. I think it's the growth strategist is up there as well. And but my website, simonhaigh.com. It's the old website, but you'll get a flavor. And then Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, pretty much most places.
Okay. Thank you so much, Simon. Thank you for your time. It's been amazing listening to you.
It's been lovely. Yeah.
So much.